Welcome, everybody. So today we are in Parshas Tetzaveh, and Parshas Tetzaveh is the Torah portion that continues to discuss on page 510 and 511 in the edition of the Chumash that we're using, which is this edition over here. There we go. There's a link to it on rabbismith.org in the resources tab under the content library. So this continues the discussion of the parts of the temple, the parts of the sanctuary that were built in the desert, and then ultimately the temple that was built in Jerusalem. And as we said, that this is significant to everybody for a couple of reasons. Number one is we have to understand that it's not sufficient to just have good thoughts, good divine thoughts. We have to bring it down into action. To bring action into the world, we have to bring a revelation of godliness into the world. And that's done by doing the right things, by doing God's will. But even if every person is doing the right thing and every person is doing the right thing all the time and thinking the right thoughts and so forth and saying the right things and doing the right things, which is obviously our goal. But the same point is that that's just us as individuals. In order to create a communal experience, we need to gather together. We need to have what we have are a temple, a sanctuary that we gather together. So we could all connect to God anywhere. God is speaking to every human being all the time, everywhere. We all have access to that. But the question is that enough? And the answer is that God desired that even though He's everywhere, and we could connect Him with Him everywhere, anytime, but still there's a concept of people coming together to serve Him. The purpose of the temple, it's the purpose of the sanctuary, and it's really, God Almighty says that His house of prayer, my house will be a house of prayer for all the nations. That what we're learning over here is a responsibility of the Jewish people to build this sanctuary, build this temple, but the service in the temple is for the purpose of the benefit of everybody. So the Kohen, the priestly family, the Kohanim, they bring different animal sacrifices on behalf of either themselves or people in the Jewish people and also the world as a whole. So we have to understand that while the laws over here do not relate, they're not the responsibility of a non-Jew to be going and building the temple, going and building the sanctuary, we have 2 points to take in mind. One is that last week's which is found over here on page. Now, Haftarah is a portion of the prophets that we read after we read the Torah portion in the synagogue on Saturday. And if we go to page 1337, we see that God gave Solomon wisdom as He had promised him to actually build the temple in Jerusalem. There was peace between Hiram. Hiram is the king of Tyre, place in Lebanon, on the coast of Lebanon, and Solomon and King Solomon. They made a treaty together. And he sent 30,000 men to Lebanon in order to be able to bring back the trees. He and King Hiram made an agreement, like a treaty, that King Hiram would provide the wood that was necessary, the trees that were necessary for the cedar trees, the special cedar trees that grow in Lebanon, beautiful big trees that they were needed for the building of the temple. So we see that there is a role for the non-Jews in the building of the temple, meaning in a supporting role, that it was necessary for the acquisition of the building materials. It was necessary for King Solomon to go into a treaty with this King Hiram in order to be able to acquire the trees that were necessary. So not only is there the service of the temple, but that applies to the entire world, but also even the construction of the temple, even though it's responsibility of the Jewish people, and it's a command of the Jewish people. It says in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 5 and verse 10. That's one of the main requirements of going into the land of Israel. So God said to the Jewish people that they had to go into the land of Israel. They have to conquer it. They have to appoint a king, and they have to neutralize any threat to the security from surrounding enemies, and they have to wipe out the nation of Amalek. So and build a temple. So these are the requirements in coming into the land of Israel. Building the temple was an essential part of that, and it's in terms of the description of the qualifications of the Messiah, of the King Messiah, is that one of his jobs is going to be to rebuild a temple. So that's one of the things to be done, because that's something that's necessary for all of mankind. And one of the unique quality of the Mashiach, the King Messiah, is that he is a leader for the entire world. King David was a ruler for the Jewish people, and he had a big impact on the non-Jews around him, but that he's compared in the Talmud to a deputy Caesar, deputy king, as compared to Mashiach, the Messiah, who is the king, the full king, because he is the one who's going to lead the entire world. So part of the job of Mashiach is to build this temple in Jerusalem. So we see that this is something that what we're learning over here is really essential. The details are not relevant so much for a non-Jewish person, because the exact details of how big this part of the wall has to be and exact components are not relevant, because it's done, the building is the responsibility of the Jewish people. But it's important to understand the centrality of this structure in the service of mankind to God Almighty. And really, we see that King Solomon, when he built the temple, he had this in mind, and he two things. One is he prayed at the inception, at the dedication of the temple. He prayed that this was for the purpose that all the nations of the world, all the peoples of humanity, should know that there's nothing but God Almighty. That was his intention in building the temple. And also we see that King Solomon built the temple in such a way that the windows were narrow on the inside and the windows widened so that the light would go and expand into the world. And he also, in addition to the command to build the candelabra, the gold candelabra, the menorah, he also built an additional 10. So he built the one that was required in the Holy of Holies, and in the ulam and the building and the structure, but outside the Holy of Holies. But then he also built an additional 10 from his own voluntariness to represent the 7 branches for each menorah, 10 extra. 10 times 7 is 70. 70 represents the nations of the world. So this light is meant to go to the nations of the world. And we also see the accounts of how the Jewish traders, when they would trade with people, and let's say ships would come to Israel, they would bring the non-Jewish sailors, the non-Jewish business traders, and so forth. They bring them to Jerusalem, to the Holy Temple, and they were very much affected by that, and it very much influenced the world in keeping the 7 laws in the law. So in this Parshas Tetzaveh, it discusses the need to light the candelabra, and then it goes through the garments that the priest need to wear. So there's special priestly garments, and you can look through on page 513. There's drawings of these. 515. There's a special breastplate that the high priest wears with gems on it, representing each one of the 12 tribes of the Jewish people. Then on page 517 is the robe. You could see a picture of the robe that is worn. And then there's a special forehead plate that's worn by on page 519, that's worn by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. There's a tunic, turban, a sash, a hat. And then shows here on page 521 the the whole process, which shows the drawings, the garments of the ordinary priest, and then the two bottom drawings of the garments of the high priest. And then it talks on page 521 in chapter 29, the process of the installation of the consecration of the Kohanim, the priestly family, into the service of doing the service in the Mishkan. And then that continues through the chapters over here, and we end off in all of chapter 29 is discussing the offerings that need to be brought in the process of consecrating the tabernacle and the priestly family that's going to serve in it. So when we were talking before about the necessity that we have, it's not enough from each one of us to be whole and in connection to God. We have to create gathering places. So a synagogue, for example, is a miniature temple. We don't have the vessels of the temple. We don't have the animal sacrifices and so forth. However, it's the concept of coming together as congregation. And just like the central temple in Jerusalem is supposed to be a house of prayer for all the nations, also every synagogue is meant to be a house of prayer for all the nations. So every non-Jew should feel comfortable in coming to a synagogue and praying to God Almighty. That's what the purpose is. Now, so on one hand, we have to recognize that it's not enough to be whole ourselves. We need to have the gathering of the souls together in and that's a place, time of unity. People come together in time and in place. But in addition, we have to look in the other direction. It's not enough to say, oh, you know what? We have a building over there. Those people are doing the service of God Almighty, and therefore they're taking care of the service for us, and it's okay. It doesn't really matter what we do. That's also not going to go anywhere. Why? Because when that happens, then the end result is that the decay of the person, the individual people, is going to bring it to a decay of the temple. You can't have the temple endure in Jerusalem if the people themselves are chaotically chasing after their thoughts and occupied with stresses and worries and anxieties and pursuing other interests, because then the whole system will collapse. The whole humanity will collapse. And so it's very important to understand that. Now, one of the tragic things is that Christianity believes that it's a replacement, it's a substitution, replacement theology. They believe that they're a replacement for the service in the temple, and that the Catholic Church, for example, believes that they're the replacement to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And we see that the way they operate things, in addition to the other problems they have, is that they believe that the priests do the work. Everyone else just goes about their daily life, and the priests are the one doing the service. They miss out the point. It's all corrupted, of course, the whole process of the Catholic Church, because it's based on a falsehood, on a falsehood that the temple service was replaced. The temple service was never. It was temporarily put in a base as the direct temple, but there's no replacement for it. But in addition, what Catholic theology teaches, that basically people can do whatever they want. In Christian theology, they teach that the law no longer applies to the individual. It's been replaced. There's a whole concept of that they've replaced the whole concept of the laws that God commanded, or they've been fulfilled and they're no longer necessary to do. Well, this is a falsehood. What it leads to is just total chaos. It leads to total chaos, and it leads to total depravity, because people are no longer rooted in the absolute command of God Almighty. They get to pick and choose what applies to them, and then they all believe that someone else is, the priests are taking care of it for them. So a mixture of these different ideas. What the Torah is telling us is that we need everyone on board 100% with God's law all the time, in addition to the fact that there's a central temple and there's people who are serving in the temple. But the service of the priestly family in the temple doesn't replace my job to do my own work, my own spiritual work. I have to do my own spiritual work. You have to do your own spiritual work. You have to do your own spiritual work. Everyone has to do their own spiritual work. That is an absolute requirement. So there's two, not independent, they're interrelated, but they're two things going on at the same time. If we don't have the temple in a physical presence, we still have our own individual obligations to do what God's will is and to follow God's commands at every time and every place. And we have to know that our goal is it's not enough to suffice and say, you know what, I'm doing well, family's doing well, thank God, the community's doing well, our country's doing well, that will be fine. No, we have to keep pushing ahead to build a temple because that's necessary, that there should be this communal experience, not only for the Jewish people, for the world as a whole. And once we have that, we have to realize we better continue to stay on track ourselves so that that temple becomes an enduring, permanent establishment in the world. Page 527 talks about the offerings in the temple, and then chapter 30, so on page 529, talks about the inner. So there was an altar built in the inner part of the sanctuary that was for incense offering. And there's a diagram of it in page 529. Again, there's many details, but the many details are the responsibility of those who have to build the actual altar, have to build the actual temple. But we need to know about it. Every Jew needs to know all the details, but non-Jews need to know the general concept that there's a place. This place is called the sanctuary. It's called the Mishkan. Then in Jerusalem, and that this is a place where there's holy service going on for the benefit of all men. And it's to the extent of the importance of this, it says that the Talmud says that if the non-Jewish nations had known the benefit that comes to them from the service in the temple in Jerusalem, they themselves would have surrounded the temple in Jerusalem to protect it from being destroyed by the Babylonians and the Romans. So this service in the temple is essential to the well-being of every human being. Okay, any questions on that? Questions online? Okay, let's now turn to spend a few minutes on prayer, and then we'll delve back down into the Talmud we learned last week, because I think that everyone was benefiting from that. It's going to pause this recording, start it again so we can